Thank you for joining us for episode 34 of Behind Our Science. I'm so excited to have our speaker, Dr. Anu Balogun from University of Pittsburgh, who's going to present how science communication can help move people. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Vic. So this is me talking about one of my passions, which is science communication. And I kind of titled it today, like you suggested, science communication that moves people. And just briefly talking about what are those practices that we can use to translate our complex science into stories that people actually care about, and not be like this guy over here yelling, "Can I tell you about science?" To this one person who doesn't want to listen, or where we, the scientists, are thinking about apples, but are translating that wrongly into oranges for the public. So when I was young, I didn't think I was very smart because I would go into these conferences or science type places and just would never, I was like, why is everything they're saying so complicated? I know it shouldn't be this complicated. And then as I grew up, I started to understand that science communication is not just about transmitting, information, because at the time when I was growing up, I feel like the majority of people in science were men, and it was all about communicating your science loudly, showing more data, making it as complex as possible. But now that I'm in academia myself, I've learned that science communication is a two-way street, and it's not this megaphone method that you see this person doing here, which often leaves people kind of shocked or overwhelmed or overloaded. And it's also not these apples and oranges situation here. So
before we move on, imposter syndrome, or this sort of imposter mental state, is super common, and you're not the first one of our guests to state that, hey, when I was in these situations, I didn't see myself represented and I felt like an imposter and I didn't feel smart enough. How did you overcome that? Was there any sort of method you used, or was it just finding people that felt represented you in the community?
That's a very good question. I feel like it never goes away. I saw a study recently where it was basically a graph that showed, I forgot exactly what it was, but it was like the smarter you are, the less likely you are to actually feel like you belong. And I feel like that's the truth for majority of I've seen PIs who discovered genes and still feel like they don't belong in science, like even if they've made these contributions to science that can never be forgotten. So I think like we should all stay humble and never get cocky at any point. But I also think like someone taught me, another mentor of mine, to record your successes or record the good things that people have to say about you in science, keep them in a folder and go back to read them anytime you feel that imposter syndrome is too strong. So I started doing that. Like whenever a senior, academician would say something good about me or my work, I would write that down, keep it somewhere, and then go back and read it and be like, oh, maybe I do deserve to be here. So that's one strategy that I would definitely recommend.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. So I've honestly really have always liked this quote by Einstein, which basically reminds us that simplicity is not the absence of complexity, but rather just how to master it, and I definitely think that in the way we currently communicate science, that simplicity is missing, and I found this image very helpful, where at the center is the ideal science communication, and throughout the triangle you have like scientists, journalists, policymakers, just trying to, translate, I guess, like our research into action. And where this triangle sort of breaks down is when we publish, but we don't explain. We just generate all our findings, we're not translating them. And that's why there's so much misinformation out there. Like, I always tell people, like, if you got onto a plane when you were traveling and you see the pilot, mind you, in order to become a pilot on like a regular 747 plane, you probably have gone through years and years of training, you have different certifications, you've acquired thousands of flying hours, like, and we board that plane and we don't say, oh, you're doing it wrong and I watched the YouTube video, so let me take over and fly the plane. No, like, you still trust them to get you where they're going. And most of the time, if there's some kind of emergency or something, like, the pilot's always communicating to the passengers, like, oh, we might go through a little bit of turbulence and we're at so and so feet and we have this, and or they'll tell you, like, oh, we're going to circle back a little bit before we come back and land, or the landing is going to be rough because of blah blah blah, or please stay in. They're always communicating, and I think that we in science are not always communicating. That's why there's so many misinformation, cherry pick claims, fake experts, policies that are shaped by opinion instead of data, and that it's just causing this increasing, or should I say, like, widening disconnect between what science is actually producing today and what people are taking out of it. And I feel like that's why this episode is really important. That's why I said yes to it, because I definitely believe that science belongs in public discourse. It does belong in journals, but not just in journals. Also, like, the public should be able to debate it, and bad communication of science should not be costing us proper healthcare, good policies, and all this negative like things. We definitely should not have people cherry picking science information, promoting conspiracy theories, all these fake experts. If again, I go back to my pilot analogy, if you're not going to take over the plane from your pilot because you watched a YouTube video, or do your own open heart surgery because you watched the YouTube video, then you shouldn't really be debating with people who have dedicated decades of their life to studying, certain things. So, before we get, to like who's talking, I always like to say, like, we should start with what we're saying or what we're trying to say. And this is another quote I like again, is that nothing in science has any value to society if it's not communicated. And it's true, we can find so many things, but if we cannot accurately communicate it to the people in the society, then honestly, I feel like we're just wasting our time. But communicating your science effectively, to me, is like making a great sandwich. That's how I think about it. And like, I personally don't like sandwiches, but there's some sandwiches that wow you. You take the first bite and it's engaging. You just can't put it down. That's how I feel like science communication should be. You should, the first layer of that bread should grab the attention. You're starting with something that is surprising, shocking, and makes the audience say, wait a minute, like, wow, I didn't know that. And then you want to deliver something of substance, like, for example, what you did, what you found, how you did it, and then you want to explain why does it matter. And a lot of people skip that why does it matter part, but I do think that is one piece that really, really holds it together. You have to connect what you're talking about to the bigger picture in life, whether it's like climate change or some disease like cancer, or science policy, or maybe you're talking about a pediatric disease like what I do. I would instantly, connect it to people who are actually struggling with those diseases, like, how the parents find it difficult to cope, how the hospitals are overwhelmed. Things like that cause people to want to pay more attention. And I just feel like this is the best way to always think about communicating your science.
No, that's a great analogy. But one of the things that I have a hard time with is I'm a basic science researcher. Most of my work is not necessarily translatable. And although I find great value in it, how do you personally decide when a finding is solid enough to share with a broader audience? Because maybe the why it matters is more about deepening our knowledge than it is for a translatable output, right?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And yes, I feel like that is definitely why one of the biggest reasons why we get our PhD to decide what information or not to communicate to the audience. And I do have a slide coming up. I think that's the next slide. How you decide is by knowing your audience. Like the way I was taught and what I've learned from science communication is everything you will speak depends on what audience you're going to. So, for example, we in basic science, translational science, that go to conferences, each presentation for each type of conference is different. So if I was, say, going to a genetics conference, the way that I would structure my talk would be different from if I was going to a liver conference, because I studied the liver, so I know that with hepatologists, I don't have to do too much explanation. But with geneticists, I have to highlight the genetics part of it. If I was going to present my work to policymakers on Capitol Hill, then I would also tailor that to those policymakers. So then I wouldn't be talking about any deep science thing or any jargons. I would be trying to show them, like, if you don't address this disease, this is the consequence, and it could happen to you too. You shouldn't think you're immune. If I was going to tell someone on the street who asked me, "Oh, what do you do?" I would tell them a certain way. So to answer your question, the key is to always know your audience and to always adapt whatever you have to say to the audience. And if you follow that, then not every piece of information would you need to share. You would just need to share the most important things. My mentor used to always tell me to tell a clean, beautiful story. And that's what I've always learned to do is tell stories, use a lot of analogies, and just build some kind of narrative. Like I've received feedback in the past saying, "Oh, this is too technical. I don't get it," and even sometimes from people in my own field. And so it does help to, really sit down and think about the audience. And that will help you efficiently communicate.
What are some ways that help you get to know the audiences you're communicating with? So the examples you gave of like the liver meeting or a genetics meeting, that makes a lot of sense. You're going to have to tailor it to those audiences. But what about the general audience? How do you meet them where they are?
That's a very good question. I think I had another slide, but that's way down.
Well, we can put a pin in that if you want to move
yes.
forward.
Don't forget to bring me back to that question if I forget. Okay. So one of the things that I like to do after you've built your perfect sandwich of science communication, after you've known your audience, the next question becomes, how do you break down your research? Like I've throughout my science career come up with different kinds of analogies. I love analogies. Like they're very beautiful when you're telling a story. This one here is one that I created to tell a lay audience what the disease porphyria is. Now, porphyria is a very difficult disease. It's been around. It's the source of all vampire legends. It's been around for a very long time. That's also something that I used to hook the audience. You saw your reaction just now. It is the source of all vampire legends. And there's still no cure. And although it's a rare disease, it does cost the United States billions of US dollars. So I came up with this, on the right here. This is what happens in porphyria, where everything is good. And you see each of these enzymes, which are the traffic lights, convert each one of the molecules that are involved in making heme into another molecule, and this light is green until you have the end product, which is heme, and this just goes round and round like a traffic, circle. Everything's great. There are no issues. But when someone has porphyria, one of those traffic lights is broken, and because of that, all the other traffic lights slow down and the cars start to pile up and you get a traffic jam. Now, whenever I would explain this pathway without this, like a scientist, yeah, can get it, but some scientists, even who are not pathway specialists and signaling specialists, struggle to understand it. But making this analogy just made it very easy and made people, even want to then listen and say, like, oh, what do I have more to say about this? So I was using this to teach basically liver metabolism. And again, depending on who I'm speaking to, I usually will adjust this model. So if I was talking to a more clinician-based audience, I would say, oh, we're identifying like key enzymatic blockades in heme biosynthesis pathway so that we can inform targeted treatment for acute hepatic porphyrias. But if it was a general audience, I would say, oh, imagine if your liver is like this traffic circle and one light malfunctions and then everything backs up. And that's what actually causes toxic molecules in your body that make you sick. So it's the same science, just a different language, because I came to learn after many years in science that it's not about how much you know. It's about whether the people you're communicating to understand. And when you fail to make sure that they understand, that's when all the misrepresentation happens and you basically leave room for less qualified people to tell your story. So another analogy that I like was when I started working with, and I like this specifically because there are a lot of people I've seen when I say, oh, we can use analogies, they always say, oh, but some topics are just not explainable. But I strongly believe that all topics are explainable, especially now that we have this large LLMs that can, you can spar with and say, oh, help me come up with an analogy to explain this. And they can provide you with options and you can go back and forth until you find something that fits. But to me, anything can be communicated with the right analogy. So take, for example, something that's very incredibly genetically niche, and it's called a tricistronic gene delivery vector. Now, the goal of this is to be able to deliver 3 different genes from one vector. It's applicable in genetic diseases like porphyria or other kinds of inborn errors of metabolism where more than one gene needs to be corrected. And so the way I think about this is like, imagine you have a fighter jet. I love planes. That's why I've been doing all plane analogies. So if you have a fighter jet, say an F-16, which is what I've shown here, and traditionally it might deliver 1 missile per mission, but to think about what this tricistronic gene delivery vector is, you can imagine this F-16 carrying 3 precision-guided missiles, all launched from just this one plane. So the plane is the platform, and it has these 3 missiles, which are the genes. And so this is what I'm trying to say. It's not science communication, like a lot of people wrongly. It's not about breaking down science. It's just about like making sure you find something that can help your audience understand. So this is what I was telling you about. I wrote an article when I did an internship with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center Media Room and communicated my science in a way. And I actually pitched this to them. I was like, a lot of people don't know about porphyria, but I bet if they knew that it all started out, it all, was the source of all the vampire legends, they would really be interested. And I had clinicians read this as well, and some recognize me and say, wow, like I never knew that, So it can be done not just with oral communication, but also with written communication as well. You can make anything stick to your audience at all. So I also, one thing that concerns me a lot is also showing a lot of data. And you can see this cartoon here where he says, do you need another chart to be convinced? And they're sick of looking at
all you're drowning them in data.
So I do think that as humans, we love stories. Every child, I don't think I've met a child yet that doesn't like stories. Like, you can make anything to a story for like a little kid and they would be excited to listen to it, and it can be a bedtime story. So I think that we are naturally wired to listen to stories. That's why we like movies, podcasts, things like that, So I still believe that you can frame anything as a story and the audience will be able to retain it. Like, you have to, I personally like to take the approach of describing the problem. Why is it hard to fix? What have we discovered, or what's new? How does it impact you, the listener? So something like that. And in talking about that, like, this is a poster that I put off online simply by Googling bad posters. And you can see it's literally just filled with words. And if I saw this, like, I'm less like, no, I'm just going to walk away. Like, there's nothing to attract you here. There's nothing at all. But on the right, I do have one that I picked up from my poster where I was trying to show what the liver looks like in two different mouse models. And I simply just, showed that, use two different kinds of mice to show like these are different, and look at what the histology looks like. And even a layperson can look at this and say like, oh, I think something may be different. I don't know what exactly, but I think something is different, which is the whole point. It's just to show that something is different. And so that's like a core part of science communication. Another thing I think that kills us is definitely jargon. A lot of my work is filled with jargon because I work in the liver, in the bile ducts, things that are very complicated. And I just, again, have seen that based on your audience, like, another thing I like to bring, which is what I was taught when I was doing my internship with UPMC, was the average, many people read at an 8th grade level. So whenever we would write for the newsroom, we were encouraged to write at an 8th grade reading level, and just remove jargon from. Jargon is never part of effective science communication, but to us scientists, jargon doesn't look like a problem, but it is a problem. So, for example, if I said autophagy to a regular person, they don't understand. But if I described it as cellular recycling, and then I showed this image of the cell eating the mitochondria, or a garbage man taking all these molecules, instantly they know what I'm talking about. Similarly, if I said, oh, my topic today is hepatocyte specific beta-catenin knockout, they don't understand. But if I say, oh, I'm talking about turning off a switch in the liver, and I show it like this, then they're like, oh, yeah, they can get it. So none of it changes. I feel like the thing today is people think like science communication changes science, but it doesn't. It just makes people understand you more.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate using the graphics, like having a diseased liver with a green light and then a healthy liver with a red light helps you connect that when this is off or stopped, it might be better. No, that's great.
Yes. And what was the question you asked that I said we were going to come back to?
Oh, it was, how do you know where to meet your audience at? Exactly. So you mentioned the general audience, right? And that is something that's quite difficult because the general audience is quite broad. You know, if I'm talking to children, I can go by their grade. And you did mention the 8th grade reading level being like average, but some people do have access to Google or have interest in things. And you do want to meet them where they're at. It's sort of like you want them to be the detectives with you when it comes to solving your crime, which is like, or your disease, right? That you're studying. So my question really is like, are there any tips you have for helping us identify where our audience is at?
Yes, I do. So from what I've learned and from what I've been taught in every science communication course or internship or everything that I've been about is to read up on the kind of people that are coming to wherever you're taking your work to. So even if, like for example, every journal has, specific type of guidelines, and it's all based on the kind of, people, readers that they have. So everywhere that I've had to present my science, and I've done it in a couple of places. I've presented to teenagers, I've presented to kids in elementary school, I've presented on Capitol Hill, I presented at different kind of conferences, and what I would do each time is just read up on the audience before I go. And of course, some people will always, in the audience will always know more. But so long as you tell a very convincing, clear, clean story, and you meet them, you guide them to, like you said, let them walk with you through the story and understand it. I've never had someone in the audience complain like, "Oh, that talk was too simple for me, and you should have been more complex." No, in fact, I've had like people who are like the top of their field always say like, "Wow, I really enjoyed how you broke it down," which always every time it surprises me, because I'm like, "Wow, you have been a professor for the past 40 years and you won all these awards and you still like how I broke it down." So that, I would say, is what I've been taught, is to always research your audience, and see what they like. So
well, I think that transcends just the general audience too, though, because you mentioned the professors. Like, keep it simple is such a clutch way of presenting our work, right? Because even if they are an expert in this tiny itty bitty protein in this tiny itty bitty cell, they may not know all the proteins, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's why it's important to keep your work simple and keep it very easy to follow. My work has a lot of signaling pathways. I was working in porphyria, in the liver, and I was working on 3 different pathways. So my goal with my communication was always to make sure people understood each pathway and how they were speaking to each other. And I've never had anyone say like, "Oh, that was too easy, you should have made it more complex." I always had people say, "I appreciated how you broke it down so I could understand." And these are professors that are excellent and at the top of their field and award-winning. So yes, I would always say you can never go wrong with keeping it simple. Even if it sounds stupid, you just can never go wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that is how we should be from jump, for sure.
Yes, exactly. So I was taught a lot about integrity. You can communicate your science and you don't have to sugarcoat it. It doesn't have to sound like, you're selling snake oil. You can just make it accessible, you make it accurate, and like we said, just you can simplify without losing the nuance of your work. I've come to appreciate that personally. And you don't have to like inflate your findings to sound appealing or like say a lot of jargon just so that people will think that you're smart. You can communicate science effectively and people will understand it and still respect you, as a researcher. I always feel like if you go somewhere and you present your work and people leave and they don't know what you've said and they can't remember anything you said, then you've not done a good job. So if you go anywhere and you present your work and you see someone later who was in the audience, they should be able to tell you one thing that you said from your work, and that's how you know that you communicated effectively.
As you know, sometimes we have findings. Today at 2:30 p.m., I analyze my qPCR and I have a new finding. How could I appropriately communicate it? Like, is there any sort of advice you could give?
Yes. I think that you need to first sit down and really understand your project. So if you are new into science, that's where I would start from, is really understand your project. And I've seen so many people that, for example, if you're in a PhD, you have to work towards your comprehensive exams, which grant you candidacy into the PhD program. And it's at that juncture, by that time you've been in a PhD program for 2 years, and then it's at that junction that people are like, "Oh, I finally understand what I'm doing." So, which means like you didn't understand it until then. So I would say start with really, 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 really understanding what you're doing. And that comes from reading a lot of papers, and building a story. I wouldn't say read and just every science writing gig that I've ever done, they do encourage you to have some kind of thing going, whether it's like a Word document, or you like to take a pen and paper and draw out like a tree, or you like to, like put in a PowerPoint, whatever. Just keep the story going. Every day you learn something new, you find where it fits in the story and put it there. I like to think of it like a human being. One day you're reading, you find the eye, and one day you're reading, you find another piece, which is the ear, and one day you're reading, you find one finger, and then eventually that whole thing will become a full human being.
Right.
And once you get your story together, then you'll know where every new piece of data fits. If you did a new qPCR and you got some results, it doesn't matter how they look, you will know where exactly it fit into that portrait that you're drawing, because it could simply be that you found another finger, or you found another toe, or a nose, or an eye, or a skin cell, or a piece of hair, something like that. But if you don't understand the basics of your project, if you don't read, you just will never know. That's when you really struggle with knowing where your data fit.
Sure. Yeah, no, I definitely think that that's super important. Being able to understand your project and like maybe the goal of the project.
Exactly.
Like knowing the direction is really vital.
Yes.
But what if someone just wants to start SciComm, like doing a podcast like we're doing right now, or maybe they just want to record themselves like trying science communication. Is there maybe something a little bit more basal that they could work on as they gear up to learn their project?
I've seen a lot of people do a lot. Like I currently know someone right now who does science communication via poems.
Oh,
that's actually really beautiful. He does cardiology, and he just does all these poems about how the heart is beating, and he's talking about the heart cells in a dish. And a lot of people, he has a lot of followers, and I feel like people are resonating with that, and they're like, like even I as a scientist saw that, and I'm like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. Yeah.
Yes, I do think that you can start, but again, that person as well also has an interest in writing and storytelling.
Yeah.
So honestly, that's what I would say. Even if you are like a regular person who just wants to jump into it, science communication, I would still say you need some sort of background, some sort of training. Like there are workshops. Every single conference you go has a science communication or science writing workshop. There are tons of them. Like the bigger organizations, the American Heart Organization, the NIH, whatever, they all offer some kind of science communication thing that teaches you to, communicate your science. And I feel like once you take a couple of those, you can start communicating, because then you know the basics. And then you can start. And some people just have a natural God-given talent, to break down science and community. I know someone who's thinking of starting a business where they simplify presentations for older people in science, so that they don't have blue and yellow, difficult to understand slides.
Oh, yes.
So, yes, but that person is also interested in science communication and has taken, a lot of steps to deepen their understanding. So I definitely would not say that you should just jump into it. There's I always believe, I've been taught that there's no knowledge that is ever wasted. So I think that you should always, do some kind of, attend some kind of workshop, something. Make sure you know the basics. Make sure that people around you, like you talked about your sister, are understanding your science, and then you can start a podcast, and start turn your science into a story and start telling people, stories like this person that's writing poems about how the heart beats in a cell dish. He's bringing science in an interesting way to the audience. So something like that.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these bright tips, including that science communication is not about us, the speaker, but rather the audience. That jargon is the silent killer. That was hilarious. I was like, I wrote that down. And also, I really enjoyed thinking about using AI or language learning models to help you explain your science. If you're kind of in a brain rut, you can't really come up with an analogy. That's a brilliant idea. I mean, people use these like ChatGPT, for example, all the time, and this is like using it for good. So I really love that. And lastly, the last point I want to drive home to our listeners is storytelling improves retention, emotional connection, and understanding of your science. So we are told and taught to write very technically whenever we're submitting to journals, but whenever we're communicating our science, storytelling is really important. So thank you so much for going over that with us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for, having me. And again, I just want to encourage people, like anything communication, just do it. You can, volunteer with a newspaper, some type of communications office. You can work for your university's press office. I did that. You can be part of a social media outreach team. There's so many ways that you can get into science communication and polish up how you communicate science.
Yeah, no, this is brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for sticking to the end of episode 34. Hope you enjoyed our episode highlighting the importance and the relevance of doing scientific communication effectively. We also want to highlight the publishing pathways for the American Journal of Pathology, the Journal of Molecular Diagnostics, and the Journal of Histochemistry and Cytochemistry. Hope you're able to take advantage of their major perks. Also, we have very interesting episodes coming up. For February, we're highlighting Dr. Dennis Jones as part of our celebration for Black History Month. And also look out for our upcoming 3-part mini-series for March, April, and May. We're going to be discussing the biology of trauma and the importance of mental health. With that in mind, hope you enjoyed the rest of this episode. And as always, we'll see you next time.